What's up, everybody? Rob here. So this is just a real quick video. It is more of a test for me. I actually am investing in this channel, and I just bought some software for simple animations, and I'm really just giving it a test drive, and I figured I'd do something pretty simplistic, just, to see how it all works out. So in any event, I'm going to be talking about the difference between fire by rank and volley fire by platoon, and yeah, that's pretty much it. There's really not much more to say there, so without any further ado, rank fire versus platoon fire, here we go. So, as the early modern period wore on, it became more and more clear that the name of the game was firepower. Muskets, and before that there were arquebuses, were more and more widely used, and the proportion of infantry that were using muskets or other ranged weaponry was constantly increasing. With the introduction of the Spanish tercio in the early part of the 16th century, at least initially, about one third of the infantry formations were using muskets and arquebuses, and the range proportion of the army was about, roughly one third. Hence the name tercio, which means three parts. The other two parts of the tercio were the pikemen and the swordsmen. However, the swordsmen were eventually replaced by pikes. So basically, it was about two thirds of the army were pikes, one third were muskets. That was roughly the ratio. Now, this proportion changed over the years, and by the dawn of the 17th century, roughly half of the army were using muskets, the other half were using pikes. And again, this could vary greatly from army to army or situation to situation, so this is not necessarily a set proportion, but you can see there's definitely, as the centuries wore on, a definite increase in the use of firearms. By the end of the 17th century, pikes were all but obsolete. They were still used into the 18th century, actually, I think by the French. But in any case, the pikes were all but obsolete, and they were replaced by the bayonet. Now, because of this, the bayonet, or the bayonet mounted on a musket, allowed the individual musketeer to act as both a pikeman or a close quarter combatant. They can hold off cavalry, they can hold off enemy infantry charges, and they can also, charge themselves into melee combat. So the name of the game, obviously, was firepower. You needed more firepower because muskets were very slow to reload and they were not very accurate. So basically, the key was volume of fire, get as much lead downrange as possible, and hopefully something will hit. Now, there are other ways to increase firepower besides increasing the proportions of ranged versus non-ranged units in your army. And one of these was, of course, drill and discipline, which is now a hallmark of military training. You can basically train a soldier to go through the repetitive motions of reloading a musket, and over time they're able to do it much more quickly, much more efficiently, and therefore they have a higher rate of fire. During the 18th century and into the 19th century, the British Army, for example, had a system where they expected a soldier with a flintlock musket to shoot 3 rounds per minute. With a matchlock musket in the earlier eras, you can get about 1 to 2 shots per minute, not as fast, but you can speed this up with training and discipline. Another way to increase firepower is to introduce thinner ranks, which just basically means making sure there's more men presented at a specific target at a specific time, which means that more people can shoot, and that, again, more fire downrange. So, in order to make up for the shortfalls of muskets, for example, their accuracy and their rate of fire, the development of volley fire came into being. Now, nobody's quite sure where it developed first. Now, some people say the Chinese did it, some people say the Ottomans did it. However, it was really the Spanish that codified it in the most practical way, which eventually spread throughout the rest of Europe. And first thing they invented here was the idea of rotating ranks. Now, there are multiple ways you can do this. This is mostly done with matchlock muskets, but you can also theoretically do it with a flintlock as well. And here is the animations. Now, these are very crude and very poor. I just got the software a couple days ago, so this is, not necessarily high quality stuff, but it's a start for my channel here. So, any case, that little gray splotches in front of each, little brick there, those are, just pretend that that's smoke. Just go with it. Don't think about it. Just go with it. Now, there are multiple ways to do it. However, the basic concept is the same. The first rank will fire, and then the ranks will shift. So the first rank will open fire, and then they will rotate to the back, or somehow you get the next rank up in front of the first rank, while the front rank either withdraws or begins the reloading process, and they just keep rotating. That's basically how it works. One of these, for example, is what you see here, the caracal formation, which the formation itself stays in place. The front rank will fire, and then it will rotate to the back. The next rank will then move up to where the front rank was. It will then open fire. And I'm only using 2 ranks here because I'm lazy and I didn't feel like doing anymore. But basically, you just keep rotating like this, and the formation itself stays in place. The individuals within the formation do move around, but the formation itself does not move. Now, this is mostly used by cavalry. This was very popular with cavalry and their pistols. However, you can also do this with infantry. There's another method which is much faster. This was eventually developed by Maurice of Nassau, where the front rank will fire and then falls back, and then rather than advancing, the second rank simply, once the first rank goes past them, they will then present their pieces and then open fire as well. Now, once they've done that, they will then fall back, and then the third rank, again, I only have 2 rows here, but the principle's still the same. They will simply keep withdrawing backwards. Now, this is much faster than the caracal formation because there's not so much moving around. However, you are stepping away from your enemy, which means you're increasing the distance after each volley, which means you're going to eventually either march right off the field, or you're going to become less and less accurate because these things are pretty inaccurate anyway. So you might as well, so with each successive volley, you're making it harder and harder to actually hit anything and having less effect on target. So eventually you would have to then, reposition the entire formation and then repeat again. Now, later on, Gustavus Adolphus, he was inspired by Maurice of Nassau, but he invented what was known as fire by induction, which is the first rank fires, and then immediately, instead of rotating, they start the very complicated process of reloading. The second rank behind them, they move forward, advance. Once they clear in front of the first rank, they will then open fire. And then behind them, again, I only have 2 here, but you can have up to 3. He originally had 6 ranks, then he eventually got the 6 ranks down to 3. But then you would have the third rank would then go up in front of the first rank and then open fire. So you're constantly advancing towards the target. You're getting more effect on target with the fact that you're closing the distance, and you're just basically being much more aggressive. Now, volley fire by rank did have certain inefficiencies, namely the constant rotation. You had to constantly rotate the first rank out of the firing line so that the second rank can come up and take their place, and this was just a very cumbersome thing to do. There are ways, like we described, that are more efficient than others, but basically this is a limitation. Now, this eventually led to the development of platoon fire. Now, instead of firing by rank, it fired by, platoon, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And it led to a rippling effect of fire down the line. It was first mentioned by Maurice of Nassau in the 1600s and was used against the Ottomans by the Holy Roman Empire in the 1680s, but it wasn't really adopted, at least not in any widespread way, until the 1700s with the introduction of flintlocks. Now, what would happen was a single rank of men, you could actually do this with multiple ranks, with one person kneeling and another person standing behind them and another person standing behind them shooting over their shoulder. That could be done, so there's really technically 3 ranks, but whatever. The point is you should have a single rank or single column, and the first grouping would fire and then immediately begin the process of reloading. The second would then make ready, present, and fire, and then begin the process of reloading. Then the third section would make ready, present, and fire. By the time the final section, the third section, had fired, the first was ready to shoot again, thusly repeating the process. And this led to a continuous rolling fire down the line. Now, usually sections were divided into 3 platoons, or 3 of these sections sometimes known as firings, but sometimes there would be a 4th, which could either be used into the normal pattern of firing, or could be kept as a reserve in case of emergency. For example, in between the firings, there was a quick enemy countercharge. They could have this reserve of firepower on hand. Now, this tactic was utilized very heavily by the Duke of Marlborough in his campaigns in the early parts of the 18th century, with the English platoon firing and able to keep up a higher rate of fire than their French counterparts, who still used volley fire by rank. And of course, the big advantage of this, why it was able to be used more effectively and more efficiently, was that they were able to put more lead downrange quickly. They didn't need to worry about rotating. They didn't need to worry about bumping into each other or getting in the way. And they could just continually, each section firing as quickly as possible without having to worry about anything else. Just make ready, present, fire, reload, make ready, present, fire, reload. And they just kept doing this, and they could just basically focus on shooting rather than having to march and counter march and fire by induction or fire by rank or anything else. They can just, unleash as much firepower as they could. This eventually would become the standard for most armies throughout the 18th century, and actually basically until muzzle loaders gave way to other more advanced firearms, but that is well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. Basically, when repeating firearms came into being, that's well, that led to World War One. But that's another story for another day. So in any case, that's it. Just a real quick video today. Just something I thought was interesting and entertaining. I just wanted to basically test out this new animation software and see how it went. In any case, that is it for this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. More videos coming out whenever I get around to it. Have a good day. Or don't have a good day. You're told to have any kind of day you want. See you later.